to pay close attention, because if there is weakness in the consumer, doesn't happen overnight, but certainly you can expect that that can trickle through the economy over time as well. Good afternoon. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the sunshine here. We're going to talk a lot today about consumer sentiment and retail sales numbers that are kind of showing that consumer may not be feeling quite as great as they have been over the past couple of years. My name is Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group, and our goal every Thursday is to bring to you the market news, the data, the trends that we're watching, and hopefully weed out a bit of the noise along the way. So again, this week, just to be clear, is maybe a little lighter on data, but really the highlight or the focal point is really all around the consumer. So we're going to talk about some data points that have come out around consumer sentiment and retail sales, but we'll wrap up with a great question of the week, talking a little bit about how the consumer actually affects the economy as well. Before we get to that, let's start with the data. So Friday last week, we had consumer sentiment come out. And consumer sentiment was down significantly, down a lot from the prior month, and certainly down a lot from the expectations coming into the data point on Friday. So what this suggests is basically consumer confidence, although there is a consumer confidence data, but let's say sentiment around the economy and what's going on is maybe pulling back a little bit. On top of that, we had retail sales numbers come out on Tuesdays this week, and retail sales were basically up 0.1%. This was below expectations. And actually, if you take out automobiles, take out autos out of that equation, the number was actually negative for the month as well. So retail sales, maybe, I don't want to say struggling, that might be a little bit harsh, but struggling maybe a little bit here through the month of the spring months here. And again, when we tie that with consumer sentiment, it begs the question, well, what's going on with the consumer and how does that impact the economy, which we'll get to as we wrap up here with our question of the week. Before I get there, I do want to highlight that this week was a shorter week in trading. So markets were closed on Wednesday for the holiday, a little bit of a split week in terms of trading. And honestly, it's been mostly quiet so far. So we'll see where the rest of the week takes us, but mostly pretty calm so far here this week. Coming up next week, we actually do have a very important data point, which is the second GDP revision. Some of you may remember from the weekly updates in the past that basically GDP came out quite some time ago, much lower than expected, and certainly showed some potential signs of slow growth in the economy. And then the revision came out even less more recently. This is the second revision, so it'll be very interesting to watch where this comes out and whether it either increases or decreases that number, or stays the same, of course, as well. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, again, we do have a really good question of the week, and the general theme is, how does the consumer affect the economy? And very timely, obviously, given the focal point here this week around consumer sentiment and retail sales. And what I will share before I get into maybe the 10,000 foot level is on the 30,000 foot level, the consumer affects the economy significantly. And basically, the confidence that consumers have completely changes the dynamics of the economy underlying that, right? Because when the consumer is confident or feeling really good about things, in general, we tend to spend more, we tend to enjoy more, and what that ultimately trickles down to is how businesses, are able to drive profits and how they're able to hire. So basically, in our economy, it all kind of starts with the consumer. Really, if the consumer is strong and confident, we tend to see good markets. When the consumer is not and starts to maybe get a little bit nervous, they generally start to save more, or let's say at least not spend more. And in that scenario, that's where we start to see it trickle through, because if we are not going out as much to eat or traveling as much or, buying clothes or whatever it might be, you can imagine that starts to impact businesses, and therefore, again, trickles down to how it might impact the labor market as well, where maybe hiring starts to slow or potentially even layoffs and so on and so forth. So maybe a long-winded way to answer the question, but I think it is really important. And I think what I want to try and highlight is really how truly important the consumer is and how the economy really shapes up as we look ahead. And the reason this is so important right now is because over the last couple of years or so, the consumer has been the beacon of hope, I guess, in terms of the economy. I mean, no matter what's going on with rates higher and higher for longer, the consumer continues to be optimistic and spend, and it certainly is shown in what we've seen on the screen back there. However, if that shifts, that's where we want to make sure to kind of pay close attention, because if there is weakness in the consumer, doesn't happen overnight, but certainly you can expect that that can trickle through the economy over time as well. So hopefully that is really helpful. And, for those who do watch weekly, you've probably heard me focus quite a bit over the past 3, 4 months or so on consumer spending, on consumer confidence, on consumer sentiment. And this is exactly why, because that really has been, again, that beacon of hope looking backwards. And hopefully it continues to show strength moving forward, but it is definitely something to watch as we look ahead through, the end of 2024 and beyond. So thanks as always for tuning in. Definitely stay tuned. Again, next week we have second GDP revision and back to full week of trading. So very likely we'll be back to a little bit more normalcy. In the meantime, enjoy the sunshine if you're in the Pacific Northwest, and we'll see you next Thursday at 3.